Tonight, we travel back to a time when freedom was only a dream, a time when the vast lands of America were not yet a nation, but a collection of fragile colonies standing under the rule of a distant king. Life was quiet but uncertain. Farmers worked their fields, merchants traded along dusty roads, and ordinary people lived their days beneath the shadow of the British Empire. Yet deep within these colonies, something powerful was slowly beginning to grow. A quiet question. What if people could govern themselves? What if freedom was not something granted by a king, but something every human being was born with? Tonight, we gently explore the long and fascinating story of how that question slowly transformed into a revolution. The story of how a scattered group of colonies began the difficult journey toward becoming a new nation. So, settle in, relax, and let the calm rhythm of history guide you. This is the beginning of the story of American freedom. War ends. But peace does not mean simplicity. The nation stands at the edge of something entirely new, not westward expansion, not civil war, but transformation. Railroads stretch like metal veins across the continent. Steel replaces wood. Smoke rises from factories in cities that barely existed decades earlier. America begins moving faster than it ever has before. The Industrial Revolution does not arrive gently. It roars. Machines clatter endlessly. Assembly lines hum day and night. Immigrants step off ships in New York Harbor, carrying little more than hope and worn suitcases. They come from Ireland, Italy, Germany, Eastern Europe, escaping famine, war, poverty, drawn by a promise whispered across oceans: opportunity. For many, the first sight of the Statue of Liberty feels symbolic, a towering figure holding a torch. But the reality waiting on shore is more complicated. Crowded tenements, long hours, dangerous factory floors, children working beside adults, 14-hour shifts, 6 days a week. Freedom in this era becomes economic. The chance to rise, to build wealth, to climb beyond the station of birth. And for some, it works. Industrial titans emerge. Carnegie in steel, Rockefeller in oil, Vanderbilt in railroads. Fortunes grow so vast they seem unreal. Cities expand upward, skylines change. Electric light begins replacing candle glow. But wealth concentrates sharply. The gap between rich and poor widens. Factory workers organize, labor unions form, strikes erupt, Pullman strike, Homestead strike, railroad protests. Workers demand fair wages, safer conditions, shorter hours, sometimes met with negotiation, often met with force. Federal troops are deployed against American workers. Freedom of enterprise clashes with freedom of labor. The question shifts: is freedom simply the right to succeed, or also the right to dignity? Meanwhile, in the South, Reconstruction's promises fade further. Segregation becomes entrenched. Voting restrictions spread. Violence enforces racial hierarchy. Lynchings terrorize communities. Jim Crow laws redefine citizenship in practice, if not in law. The 14th and 15th Amendments remain written on paper. But paper alone cannot guarantee justice. And yet, change continues. The country keeps evolving. New inventions transform daily life. The telephone, the light bulb, automobiles, distance shrinks, communication accelerates, the world feels smaller. By the early 1900s, before movements gain momentum, journalists expose corruption. Trust-busting laws target monopolies. Progressive leaders push for regulation. Child labor laws, food safety standards. Women demand voting rights more forcefully. In 1920, the 19th Amendment grants women the right to vote, a milestone decades in the making. Another expansion of the definition of freedom, still unperfect, still unequal in practice for many women of color, but undeniably transformative. Then, comes global conflict. World War I pulls America onto international stage. The nation that once resisted foreign entanglements now sends troops overseas, fighting not just for territory, but for the idea of democracy itself. The war ends, but the world remains unstable. The 1920s bring prosperity. Jazz fills city streets. Stock markets soar. Consumer culture explodes. Credit becomes common. Optimism feels endless. But beneath celebration, risk builds quietly. And when the market crashes in 1929, it crashes hard. Banks fail. Businesses collapse. Unemployment skyrockets. Families lose homes. Bread lines stretch long. The Great Depression tests faith in capitalism, tests faith in government, tests faith in the American promise itself. Franklin D. Roosevelt introduces the New Deal, federal programs aimed at relief and recovery, public works projects, social security, financial regulation. Government's role expands dramatically. Some call it necessary, others call it overreach. Freedom is debated again. Is it freedom from government or freedom from starvation? Before recovery fully settles, another war erupts. World War II. The United States enters after Pearl Harbor. Mobilization is massive. Factories convert to war production. Women enter workforce in unprecedented numbers. Rosie the Riveter becomes icon. African American soldiers fight abroad while facing segregation at home. Japanese Americans are interned in camps, their loyalty questioned. Fear reshapes policy. The war ends in 1945. America emerges powerful, economically strong, militarily dominant. The global balance shifts. But tension replaces open warfare. The Cold War begins, a long ideological struggle between democracy and communism. Nuclear weapons create constant background anxiety. The world feels one mistake away from catastrophe. At home, prosperity returns in the 1950s. Suburbs expand. Television enters living rooms. Highways connect cities. Middle-class life grows. But segregation still divides schools, neighborhoods, opportunity. And so, the next great test of American freedom rises, the civil rights movement. But that is where we will continue next. For now, rest in the hum of industry, the glow of electric cities, the tension between wealth and fairness, because freedom in America is no longer just about independence from kings. It is about defining opportunity in a modern world. Drift gently and return when you're ready to witness a movement that will challenge the nation's conscience once more. The sound of that single gunshot does not fade quickly. It lingers. It echoes across fields still damp with morning mist. And for a brief moment, after the smoke clears, nobody fully understands what has just happened. Militiamen stand frozen. British soldiers grip their muskets tighter. The air feels different now, heavier, because once violence begins, it carries its own momentum. The clash at Lexington is small in numbers, but history does not measure importance by body count. It measures it by consequence. And this is consequence. The British troops move on toward Concord. Their mission remains unchanged: seize colonial weapons, restore order. But the countryside has awakened. Church bells ring, riders shout warnings, farmers leave plows in fields and pick up rifles. Blacksmiths, teachers, shopkeepers, men who have never seen formal battle now move with urgency. Along the road to Concord, something unexpected happens. Instead of standing in neat lines like European soldiers, colonial fighters spread out. They hide behind trees, stone walls, barns. They fire from distance, disappear, then strike again. It is not traditional warfare. It is survival warfare, improvised, raw, unpredictable. British soldiers trained for open field combat feel the difference immediately. They are marching through unfamiliar land, under constant harassment. Each bend in the road feels dangerous. Every tree line feels alive. By the time they retreat toward Boston, the road behind them is lined with smoke and chaos. This is no longer a protest. This is armed resistance. News travels faster than ships can carry it across the Atlantic. Within weeks, the colonies buzz with one undeniable truth: war has begun. But here's the quiet detail history sometimes rushes past. Most colonists still do not want independence. They want resolution. They want respect. They want representation. Separation still feels extreme, unimaginable. Even as militias gather around Boston, leaders send petitions to the king. Letters written carefully, almost pleading, asking for understanding, for fairness, for recognition as loyal subjects with rights. King George does not see it that way. To him, this is rebellion. Order must be restored. The British Empire does not negotiate with uprisings. And just like that, hope for compromise fades. The Continental Congress convenes again. Delegates arrive from different colonies, different accents, different interests, different fears. But they share one growing realization. If they fight, they must fight together. They appoint a commander, a tall Virginian with steady eyes and quiet presence. George Washington. He does not look like a revolutionary icon yet. He looks like a plantation owner who understands discipline. He accepts command not with celebration, but with awareness of risk. Because facing the British Empire is not like facing a small rival. Britain possesses the most powerful military on earth, professional soldiers, a dominant navy, battle-tested generals. The colonies have farmers. And yet, the war does not collapse immediately. Because this is not only a war of armies, it is a war of will. The siege of Boston stretches on. Months of tension, limited supplies, harsh weather, both sides waiting, watching, testing. Colonial forces fortify positions quietly. One night under darkness, they move cannons into place overlooking the city. When morning arrives, British commanders see something unsettling. The colonists are not disorganized. They are adapting. Eventually, British forces evacuate Boston. Not defeated completely, but pushed out. It is a psychological victory, proof that resistance is possible. Still, independence remains unspoken publicly. Until a writer changes everything. Thomas Paine publishes a pamphlet, Common Sense. It spreads like wildfire. Simple language, direct arguments. No complex philosophy, just clarity. Why should an island rule a continent? Why should kings hold authority by birth? Why not create something new? The words strike colonists differently than speeches ever could, because they are written for ordinary people, and ordinary people begin imagining independence seriously, for the first time. By summer of 1776, the question can no longer be avoided: separation or submission. Delegates gather in Philadelphia. The heat is thick, windows closed for secrecy. Debates stretch long into the night. Some fear failure, some fear execution, because signing a Declaration of Independence is not symbolic. It is treason. If they lose, they hang. But hesitation slowly gives way to resolve. A document is drafted, carefully worded, bold yet measured, declaring that all men are created equal, that governments derive power from consent of the governed, that when a government becomes destructive, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. These ideas are radical, explosive, dangerous. On July 4, 1776, the Declaration of Independence is adopted. But here is the quiet truth: celebration is brief. Because words do not win wars. And now the colonies must survive the consequences of their declaration. British forces prepare a massive counteroffensive. New York becomes the next battleground. Ships fill the harbor. Red uniforms line the shores. The scale of British strength becomes clear. This is not symbolic conflict. This is empire versus experiment. Washington's army struggles, poorly equipped, often unpaid. Desertions rise, morale dips. New York falls. Retreat follows retreat. At times it seems independence was declared too soon, too boldly, too optimistically. But survival in revolution is rarely linear. It bends, it breaks, it rebuilds. Winter approaches, and Washington makes a desperate gamble. Crossing the icy Delaware River under darkness, launching a surprise attack at Trenton. The victory is small militarily, but enormous psychologically. It proves the Continental Army can strike effectively. Momentum shifts slightly, not dramatically, but enough, and as this war stretches on, something deeper transforms. Colonists who once considered themselves British subjects now see themselves as Americans. Identity solidifies through struggle, shared hardship, shared risk, shared blood. Freedom is no longer theoretical, it is personal. Tonight, we pause here, with war still uncertain, with victory far from guaranteed, with independence declared but not secured, because freedom's birth is not a single moment, it is a prolonged test of endurance. Let the quiet settle around you again. Imagine the flicker of campfires under cold colonial skies, soldiers wrapped in thin blankets, letters written home by candlelight, uncertain if they will survive another year. And when you're ready, continue this journey into the long, grinding heart of revolution. Rest gently and drift deeper into history's unfolding night. The war does not feel heroic most days. It feels slow, cold, hungry, and uncertain. After the early clashes, after declarations are signed and speeches are printed, reality settles in. Armies must eat, soldiers must be paid, soldiers must be paid, and the Continental Army has very little of any of it. As months stretch into years, enthusiasm fades into endurance. Washington's army moves constantly, retreating, repositioning, avoiding total destruction, because that becomes the strategy, not glorious victory, but survival. The British hold major cities. New York remains under their control. Philadelphia falls for a time. Ports are blockaded. Trade suffers. The economy strains. Paper currency loses value. Farmers grow tired of giving food without payment. Support wavers. And here is something rarely emphasized. The colonies are not united in perfect harmony. Roughly one-third support independence strongly. One-third remain loyal to Britain. The remaining third simply want stability, peace. An end to disruption, neighbors argue, families split, loyalists quietly assist British forces. Patriots threaten those who hesitate. Civil tension runs just beneath the larger war. In the South, conflict turns brutal. Fighting is less formal, more personal. Small skirmishes between neighbors, plantations burned, retaliation followed by retaliation. Freedom's price becomes intimate. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Britain grows frustrated. The war drags longer than expected. The colonies refuse to collapse, and European powers watch carefully, especially France. France remembers losing territory to Britain years earlier. Supporting the American rebellion becomes opportunity, but they hesitate until the rebels prove they can win a significant battle. That moment comes at Saratoga. American forces surround and defeat a major British army. It is decisive, convincing, impossible to ignore. And suddenly France steps in. Ships, weapons, money, troops. The war transforms from colonial uprising into international conflict. Britain must now fight on multiple fronts. Pressure increases. But even with French support, the Continental Army still suffers. Winter at Valley Forge becomes symbol. Not because it is the coldest winter ever recorded, but because it tests morale. Snow blankets the encampment. Supplies remain scarce. Many soldiers lack proper shoes. Footprints in snow, sometimes marked by blood. Disease spreads quickly. Smallpox, fever, infection. And yet, they stay. Why? Because something deeper than comfort holds them there. Commitment, belief, shared sacrifice. During this time, discipline improves. Training becomes structured. European officers teach battlefield tactics. The army slowly transforms from scattered militia into coordinated force. Not perfect, but stronger. Washington himself faces doubt. Criticism whispers through political circles. Some question his leadership. Others suggest replacing him. Power struggles quietly unfold, but Washington remains steady, measured, aware that impatience can destroy fragile unity. And outside the battlefield, another contradiction sharpens. The rhetoric of liberty echoes loudly. All men are created equal. But slavery continues. Enslaved people hear talk of freedom constantly, and many begin asking their own silent question: does this freedom include us? Some enslaved individuals escape and join British lines, promised emancipation. Others join the Continental cause, hoping service might secure future rights. Both sides use freedom as incentive, but neither fully resolves its meaning. The revolution exposes the nation's paradox early. Freedom is expanding, but unevenly. Women too find themselves in complicated roles, running farms while men fight, managing businesses, carrying messages. Some even disguise themselves to join battle. Their labor sustains the rebellion, yet political recognition remains distant. War reshapes society quietly, not just through battles, but through necessity. By the late 1770s, fighting intensifies in the South. British strategy shifts. They believe loyalist support is stronger there. Georgia falls, Charleston falls. Violence spreads through Carolinas. Guerrilla warfare dominates. Ambushes, raids, swift retaliation. The war feels endless. Years pass. Children grow older without fathers present. Fields go untended. Death rises. Fatigue sets in. And yet, collapse never fully arrives. Because revolutions are not powered by comfort, they are powered by refusal. Refusal to return to old control, refusal to admit failure, refusal to admit an idea once imagined. Finally, in 1781, a decisive moment emerges. British General Cornwallis positions his army at Yorktown, Virginia, expecting naval support, expecting reinforcement, expecting escape if needed. But timing changes everything. French naval forces block the Chesapeake Bay, preventing British evacuation. American and French troops surround Yorktown by land. Trenches are dug, cannons positioned, bombardment begins. Days of relentless artillery weaken defenses. Supplies dwindle, options disappear. And then, white flags appear. Cornwallis surrenders, not the entire British Empire, but enough to break momentum, enough to shift negotiations. The war is effectively over, though formal peace will take time. When news spreads, celebration is cautious, relief more than joy. Because independence exists now, but the future remains uncertain. Winning a war is one thing, building a nation is another entirely. The Articles of Confederation govern loosely. States hold significant power. The central government struggles financially. Debt looms large. Foreign nations watch carefully. Freedom has been achieved militarily, but politically it is fragile. And so tonight, we pause in that fragile space. A newborn nation breathing uncertain air. Victorious, but vulnerable. Imagine exhausted soldiers returning home. Uniforms worn thin. Stories heavy. Farms overgrown. Families changed. Freedom feels real now, but undefined, because the hardest part of a revolution is not breaking away, it is deciding what comes next. Rest in this quiet after conflict. Let the echo of distant cannons fade, and when you are ready, continue into the uncertain dawn of a new republic. Drift gently, and return whenever you wish, for calm reflections beneath history's long shadow. Silence after war feels different than silence before it. Before the revolution, silence carried tension. Now, it carries uncertainty. The cannons have stopped. The uniforms are folded away. The British ships no longer crowd the harbors. But independence, once achieved, does not automatically create stability. It creates responsibility. The soldiers return home, some to farms overgrown with weeds, some to businesses drowning in debt, some to families who barely recognize the men who left years earlier. Victory does not erase hardship. In many ways, it reviews it. The colonies are no longer colonies, they are states. independent from Britain, but loosely connected to each other, bound by shared struggle yet divided by regional interests. North and South see the world differently. Large states and small states argue about influence. Coastal merchants and inland farmers disagree on economics. The Articles of Confederation attempt to hold everything together, but they are cautious, too cautious, fearful of creating another powerful central authority like the monarchy they just escaped. So they design a government intentionally weak. Congress can suggest, but not enforce. It can request funds, but not demand them. It can speak, but it struggles to act. Debt from the war weighs heavily. Foreign nations wait to see if this new republic will collapse. Inflation spirals. Paper money loses value quickly. Farmers struggle to pay taxes. Veterans demand compensation long overdue. And then comes Shays' rebellion. Not foreign invasion, not British threat, but internal uprising. Farmers in Massachusetts, burdened by debt and high taxes, rise up in protest. Courthouses are shut down. Armed resistance emerges. The state militia eventually suppresses it. But the message is clear. The government is too weak to maintain order consistently. Fear spreads among political leaders. They fought to escape tyranny. But now they face chaos, and chaos can destroy freedom just as easily as oppression. So in 1787, delegates gather again, this time in Philadelphia, behind closed doors, windows shut tight despite summer heat. Secrecy surrounds the meeting, because officially they are only meant to revise the articles. Unofficially, they are about to design something entirely new. Voices fill the room. James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, Benjamin Franklin, George Washington presiding quietly, each carrying vision and worry. Debates stretch long into humid nights. How much power should the federal government have? Too strong and liberty is threatened. Too weak and the nation fractures. Large states demand representation by population. Small states fear being overshadowed. Compromise becomes survival. The great compromise emerges. Two chambers of Congress, one representing people by population, the other giving equal voice to states. Balance, carefully engineered balance. But deeper conflicts surface, especially over slavery. Southern states rely heavily on enslaved labor. Northern states are gradually shifting away from it. Yet unity requires concession. And so comes one of the most controversial compromises in American history, the Three-Fifths Compromise. Counting enslaved individuals as three-fifths of a person for representation purposes. It is a political solution, but morally, it plants a wound. Freedom continues to be negotiated unevenly. Weeks pass, drafts are revised, arguments flare, but slowly a framework takes shape. The Constitution, a stronger federal government, executive branch, legislative branch, judicial branch, separation of powers, checks and balances, power distributed intentionally, not concentrated, authority divided so no single hand can grip it fully. Yet even this new constitution faces resistance. Many fear centralized control. They demand explicit protections for individual rights. And so promises are made. A Bill of Rights will be added, guaranteeing freedoms of speech, religion, press, assembly, due process. The Constitution is signed, not with blind optimism, but cautious hope. Ratification debates rage across states. Newspapers print arguments both supporting and opposing. Public discourse deepens. The idea of citizenship evolves. Eventually, the Constitution is ratified, and George Washington becomes the first president. He does not seek the position eagerly, but he understands symbolism. Stability requires trust, and his reputation provides it. The new government begins cautiously. Every action sets precedent. How long should a president serve? How much authority should executive power hold? How should disagreements be resolved peacefully? Washington steps carefully, knowing the world watches, knowing failure could invite foreign interference, knowing missteps could fracture unity. Political parties begin forming despite warnings against division. Federalists, Democratic Republicans, debates over banking systems, foreign alliances, economic policy. The Republic is alive, dynamic, messy, and yet, for all its progress, the contradiction remains. Enslaved individuals still labor in fields. Native American nations face expansion pressure. Women remain without voting rights. Freedom exists, but not universally. Still, the experiment holds. Power transfers peacefully from Washington to John Adams, then to Thomas Jefferson. No coups, no civil war, just ballads and debate. A radical achievement in a world ruled mostly by monarchy. Across the Atlantic, revolutions erupt violently in France. Europe burns with instability. But the United States survives, imperfectly, but steadily. Expansion westward begins accelerating. Land beyond the Appalachian Mountains calls settlers forward. Opportunity, ownership, fresh beginnings. But this movement brings conflict again with native nations. Treaties are signed, broken, renegotiated, broken again, broken again. Expansion becomes both promise and tragedy. Freedom grows geographically, but at cost. And so tonight, we pause in the early years of the Republic. A nation still fragile, still learning, still divining itself, balancing liberty and order, expansion and morality, unity and division. Imagine quiet evenings in the 1790s, oil lamps glowing softly, citizens reading newspapers discussing constitutional interpretation, farmers debating federal authority at local taverns, a society discovering what self-governance truly demands, because freedom is not self-sustaining. It requires vigilance, compromise, participation. And in the decades ahead, those tensions would stretch even further. Toward conflict no compromise can permanently contain. Rest now in this delicate balance. The revolution complete, the Republic formed, but deeper fractures slowly widening beneath the surface. Drift gently, and when you are ready, return to follow the nation as it expands westward and approaches the storm that will test freedom more severely than ever before. Until then, sleep peacefully and wander history's quiet corridors. The Republic is still young, still learning how to breathe on its own. Presidents come and go without bloodshed. Courts begin shaping law. Congress argues loudly but peacefully. From the outside, the experiment appears stable, but beneath that stability, movement is accelerating. Land. That is what draws attention now. Beyond the original states, beyond the mountains, beyond the familiar coastlines, there is space, vast space. And in the early 1800s, space means possibility. When Thomas Jefferson completes the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, the size of the nation doubles almost overnight. No fireworks mark the moment, no dramatic battlefield victory, just a signature. And suddenly, the map changes. The United States now stretches deep into territory few Americans have ever seen. Explorers are sent west. Lewis and Clark travel through unknown landscapes, mapping rivers, recording plants and animals unfamiliar to science, meeting native nations whose words are about to change forever. Their journey feels adventurous in journals, but it signals something larger. Expansion is no longer an idea. It is policy. Settlers begin moving westward in greater numbers. Wagons creak along rough trails. Families pack everything they own into wooden frames and head toward promise. Land ownership represents independence. A farm of your own means control over your future. No landlord, no noble, just soil and sweat. But that land is not empty. Native American nations occupy it, live on it, depend on it, and as American expansion accelerates, conflict intensifies. Treaties are negotiated, often under pressure, often misunderstood, often broken. The federal government increasingly prioritizes settlers over indigenous nations. and the philosophy of manifest destiny begins forming. The belief that expansion across the continent is not only inevitable but ordained, that freedom must stretch from ocean to ocean. But freedom for one group often means displacement for another. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 formalizes forced relocation. Tribes in the southeast are ordered west of the Mississippi River. Many resist. Some take cases to the Supreme Court. Legal victories are declared, but enforcement does not follow. And so begins the Trail of Tears. Families forced from ancestral lands, marching hundreds of miles under military supervision, cold, hunger, disease, thousands die along the journey. The republic that speaks of liberty participates in suffering. This contradiction deepens the moral tension of the nation, because while expansion brings opportunity to settlers, it leaves scars behind. Meanwhile, in the south, cotton transforms the economy. The cotton gin makes production faster, profits increase dramatically, plantations expand, and with expansion comes increased reliance on enslaved labor. Slavery becomes deeply embedded in the southern economic system, not incidental, but foundational. In the north, industry grows, factories rise, cities expand, immigrants arrive from Europe seeking work and freedom from poverty. Different economies shape different priorities, different moral debates, different futures. The question of slavery grows louder. As new territories apply for statehood, Congress faces a dilemma. Will they allow slavery or prohibit it? Balance between free and slave states becomes political obsession. Compromises are struck. The Missouri Compromise draws a line across the map. Above it, slavery is restricted. Below it, permitted. A temporary solution to a permanent problem. For a time it holds, but only barely, because freedom in America has always carried layered meaning. For white landowners in new western territories, freedom means opportunity and property. For enslaved individuals, freedom means something entirely different. It means survival, autonomy, family unity, the ability to exist without chains. Abolitionist voices begin rising in the North. Newspapers print first-hand accounts of slavery's brutality. Speakers travel town to town arguing that liberty must apply universally. Harriet Tubman leads enslaved individuals to freedom along secret routes known as the Underground Railroad, risking her life repeatedly. Freedom here is not theoretical, it is urgent. Southern leaders defend slavery fiercely, calling it necessary, calling it lawful, calling it protected by the Constitution. Political debates grow sharper, personal, emotional, divisive. Then comes the Compromise of 1850, another attempt to calm tensions. California admitted as a free state, stronger fugitive slave laws passed in return, requiring citizens even in free states to assist in returning escaped individuals. The North reacts with outrage. Moral lines blur. The Kansas-Nebraska Act follows, allowing settlers in those territories to decide the slavery question themselves. Popular sovereignty. It sounds democratic, but it leads to violence. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers flood Kansas. Armed conflict erupts. Bleeding Kansas becomes symbol of a nation fracturing. In 1857, the Supreme Court issues the Dred Scott decision, declaring that African Americans cannot be citizens, declaring that Congress cannot prohibit slavery in territories. The ruling shocks the North, celebrated in parts of the South, but nationally, it deepens the divide. By the time Abraham Lincoln runs for president in 1860, the country stands on unstable ground. Lincoln does not initially call for immediate abolition everywhere, but he opposes expansion of slavery into new territories. That position alone alarms southern states. When he wins the election, several states choose secession. They form the Confederacy, declaring separation from the Union. And suddenly, the question of freedom returns to battlefield form. The Civil War begins in 1861. Brother against brother, state against state. The bloodiest conflict in American history, not foreign invasion, but internal fracture. At first, the war focuses on preserving the Union. But as it drags on, Lincoln reframes its purpose. In 1863, he issues the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring enslaved individuals in rebelling states free. It does not instantly end slavery everywhere, but it shifts the moral weight of the war. Freedom becomes central. Enslaved men join Union forces, fighting for their own liberation. For a nation that has long denied them equality, the war intensifies. Battles at Gettysburg, Antietam, Vicksburg. Thousands fall, families shattered, cities burned. And finally, in 1865, the Confederacy collapses. The Union survives. The 13th Amendment abolishes slavery, legally ending an institution that contradicted the nation's founding words for nearly a century. But freedom does not settle neatly after war. Reconstruction begins. New amendments guarantee citizenship and voting rights to black men. For a brief period, political participation expands dramatically in the South. Progress feels possible. Then the resistance emerges. Violence, intimidation, new laws designed to suppress rights. Jim Crow policies slowly dismantle many gains. Segregation becomes systemic. Freedom exists in law, but not fully in practice. And so tonight, we pause again at another turning point. Slavery abolished, union preserved, but equality unfinished. Imagine the silence after cannon fire fades, fields scarred, families rebuilding, a nation both healed and wounded at once. Because American freedom has never moved in a straight line. It advances, it retreats, it struggles, it redefines itself. Rest here in this fragile reconstruction. The promise renewed, the path uncertain. And when you are ready, we will continue into the industrial age, where freedom faces new challenges not of chains, but of factories, wealth, and power. Until then, let history settle softly around you and drift once more through the long, complicated story of liberty. War ends. But peace does not mean simplicity. The nation stands at the edge of something entirely new. Not westward expansion, not civil war, but transformation. Railroads stretch like metal veins across the continent. Steel replaces wood. Smoke rises from factories and cities that barely existed decades earlier. America begins moving faster than it ever has before. The Industrial Revolution does not arrive gently. It roars. Machines clatter endlessly. Assembly lines hum day and night. Immigrants step off ships in New York Harbor carrying little more than hope and worn suitcases. They come from Ireland, Italy, Germany, Eastern Europe. Escaping famine, war, poverty. Drawn by a promise whispered across oceans, opportunity. For many, the first sight of the Statue of Liberty feels symbolic, a towering figure holding a torch. But the reality waiting on shore is more complicated. Crowded tenements, long hours, dangerous factory floors, children working beside adults, 14-hour shifts, 6 days a week. Freedom in this era becomes economic, the chance to rise, to build wealth, to climb beyond the station of birth. And for some, it works. Industrial titans emerge. Carnegie in steel, Rockefeller in oil, Vanderbilt in railroads. Fortunes grow so vast they seem unreal. Cities expand upward. Skylines change. Electric light begins replacing candle glow. But wealth concentrates sharply. The gap between rich and poor widens. Factory workers organize. Labor unions form. Strikes erupt. Pullman strike. Homestead strike. Railroad protests. Workers demand fair wages, safer conditions, shorter hours, sometimes met with negotiation, often met with force. Federal troops are deployed against American workers. Freedom of enterprise clashes with freedom of labor. The question shifts. Is freedom simply the right to succeed, or also the right to dignity? Meanwhile, in the South, Reconstruction's promises fade further. Segregation becomes entrenched. Voting restrictions spread. Violence enforces racial hierarchy. Lynchings terrorize communities. Jim Crow laws redefine citizenship in practice, if not in law. The 14th and 15th Amendments remain written on paper, but paper alone cannot guarantee justice. And yet, change continues. The country keeps evolving. New inventions transform daily life. The telephone, the light bulb, automobiles. Distance shrinks. Communication accelerates. The world feels smaller. By the early 1900s, reform movements gain momentum. Journalists expose corruption. Trust-busting laws target monopolies. Progressive leaders push for regulation. Child labor laws. Food safety standards. Women demand voting rights more forcefully. In 1920, the 19th Amendment grants women the right to vote, a milestone decades in the making, another expansion of the definition of freedom. Still imperfect, still unequal in practice for many women of color, but undeniably transformative. Then comes global conflict. World War I pulls America onto international stage. The nation that once resisted foreign entanglements now sends troops overseas, fighting not just for territory, but for the idea of democracy itself. The war ends, but the world remains unstable. The 1920s bring prosperity. Jazz fills city streets. Stock markets soar. Consumer culture explodes. Credit becomes common. Optimism feels endless. But beneath celebration, risk builds quietly. And when the market crashes in 1929, it crashes hard. Banks fail. Businesses collapse. Unemployment skyrockets. Families lose homes. Breadlines stretch long. The Great Depression tests faith in capitalism, tests faith in government, tests faith in the American promise itself. Franklin D. Roosevelt introduces the New Deal. Federal programs aimed at relief and recovery, public works projects, social security, financial regulation. Government's role expands dramatically. Some call it necessary, others call it overreach. Freedom is debated again. Is it freedom from government or freedom from starvation? Before recovery fully settles, another war erupts. World War II. The United States enters after Pearl Harbor. Mobilization is massive. Factories convert to war production. Women enter workforce in unprecedented numbers. Rosie the Riveter becomes icon. African American soldiers fight abroad while facing segregation at home. Japanese Americans are interned in camps, their loyalty questioned. Fear reshapes policy. The war ends in 1945. America emerges powerful, economically strong, militarily dominant. The global balance shifts, but tension replaces open warfare. The Cold War begins, a long ideological struggle between democracy and communism. Nuclear weapons create constant background anxiety. The world feels one mistake away from catastrophe. At home, prosperity returns in the 1950s. Suburbs expand. Television enters living rooms. Highways connect cities. Middle-class life grows, but segregation still divides schools, neighborhoods, opportunity. And so, the next great test of American freedom rises. The civil rights movement, but that is where we will continue next. For now, rest in the hum of industry, the glow of electric cities, the tension between wealth and fairness. Because freedom in America is no longer just about independence from kings. It is about defining opportunity in a modern world. Drift gently and return when you're ready to witness a movement that will challenge the nation's conscience once more. The hum of prosperity in the 1950s sounds comforting from a distance. Televisions blow softly in suburban living rooms. Highways stretch wide and smooth across states. New houses rise in neat rows. Lawns trimmed. Cars polished. Smiles rehearsed for advertisements that promise a simple truth. America has made it. But comfort is not evenly distributed. Beneath the surface of post-war prosperity, segregation remains deeply rooted. In the South, signs still mark water fountains. Schools remain divided by race. Buses assign seats not by choice but by color. In many northern cities, discrimination exists quietly through housing policies and hiring practices. Opportunity feels available but not equally accessible. Freedom has expanded in theory, yet practice tells another story. In 1954, a Supreme Court decision shifts the ground. Brown v. Board of Education declares school segregation unconstitutional. The ruling is clear. Separate is not equal. It is a legal earthquake. But change on paper does not guarantee change in streets. Resistance rises quickly. Some states delay integration deliberately, others defy it openly. And so the struggle moves from courtrooms to communities. In Montgomery, Alabama, a woman named Rosa Parks refuses to give up her seat on a bus. It is not dramatic, not loud, just steady refusal. Her arrest sparks a boycott. For over a year, black residents of Montgomery refuse to ride city buses. They walk, carpool, organize, sacrifice convenience for principle, and the boycott succeeds. Segregation on buses is struck down. A young minister named Martin Luther King Jr. emerges as a national voice. His message blends moral clarity with nonviolent resistance. He speaks of dreams, of equality promised in founding documents, of justice long delayed. Sit-ins spread across the South. Students occupy segregated lunch counters peacefully. They endure insults, spill drinks, physical assault, but they remain seated, still, disciplined. The image of quiet dignity under hostility changes national conversation. Freedom riders board interstate buses challenging segregation laws. They are attacked, buses burned, passengers beaten. Yet the rides continue, because the movement understands something powerful. Visibility creates pressure. Pressure creates change. Television brings these images into American homes. Violence against peaceful protesters shocks viewers. The nation is forced to confront contradictions it has long ignored. In 1963, thousands gather in Washington, D.C., standing before the Lincoln Memorial. King delivers his "I Have a Dream" speech. He speaks not of revenge, but of fulfillment, of a nation living up to its own ideals. Momentum builds. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act passes, outlawing segregation in public accommodations, banning discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. In 1965, the Voting Rights Act follows, protecting access to the ballot. These are monumental shifts. Legal frameworks change dramatically. But transformation is uneven. Resistance does not disappear overnight. Violence continues in places. Economic inequality persists. Urban unrest grows later in the decade. Frustration deepens. The movement itself evolves. Voices like Malcolm X emphasize different approaches. Black power movements rise. Debates occur within the struggle. Nonviolence versus self-defense. Integration versus autonomy. Freedom once again reveals itself as layered. It is not a single moment. It is ongoing negotiation. Meanwhile, the nation faces external pressure. The Vietnam War intensifies. Young Americans are drafted. Protests erupt on college campuses. Questions about government transparency surface. Trust erodes. Images from Vietnam play nightly on television. Casualties mount. Students chant for peace. The idea of freedom abroad feels complicated when dissent grows at home. In 1968, tragedy strikes. Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated. Shock ripples through cities. Grief mixes with anger. Riots break out in multiple urban centers. The dream feels wounded. Yet even in loss, the movement reshapes America permanently. Segregation as official policy collapses. Voting access expands significantly. Public consciousness shifts. Freedom is no longer defined solely by independence from monarchy, nor solely by westward expansion. It is now deeply tied to civil rights, to equality under law, to inclusion. The 1970s follow with continued change. Women's liberation movements gain traction. Title IX expands educational opportunities. The conversation around equality broadens further. The Supreme Court makes landmark rulings affecting privacy and rights. Debates intensify, politics polarize. By the end of the 20th century, America looks vastly different from its founding era. More diverse, more urban, more globally connected, yet still wrestling with inequality, with division, with interpretation of its own principles. And so tonight we pause in this era of transformation, in America confronting its own contradictions openly, startling loudly, arguing fiercely, but moving. Imagine a quiet evening in the late 1960s, television static fading, newspapers folded on kitchen tables, families discussing headlines that feel historic, the sense that something fundamentally shifting, because freedom in America has never been static. It expands, contracts, reforms, resists. The story is not finished, not even close. Rest here in the echo of marching feet, in the memory of raised voices calling for justice, in the understanding that liberty requires constant renewal. And when you are ready, we will continue into the closing decades of the century, where new economic forces, new technologies, and new global tensions redefine freedom once more. Until then, let your thoughts settle softly and lift again through history's long unfold. The year is 1980. The protests of the 1960s have quieted. The streets are no longer filled with marching crowds. But change has not stopped. It has simply shifted direction. America enters a new chapter defined less by mass movements and more by markets. Inflation had surged in the late 1970s. Gas lines stretched for blocks. Confidence wavered. The Cold War still loomed. The Soviet Union remained a global rival, and many Americans felt something had been lost, not freedom but momentum. In 1981, Ronald Reagan takes office. His message is clear. Government is not the solution. Government is the problem. He promotes tax cuts, deregulation, a stronger military, and faith in free markets. The 1980s become a decade of economic transformation. Wall Street rises. Corporate mergers expand. Entrepreneurship becomes a cultural ideal. The image of success shifts toward ambition, risk, and wealth. Freedom, once framed in civil rights marches, is now often framed in economic opportunity. Yet prosperity does not reach everyone equally. Industrial towns in the Midwest struggle as factories close. Manufacturing jobs move overseas. Automation increases. Communities built around steel and automobiles begin to shrink. The American dream feels sturdy in some suburbs and fragile in others. Meanwhile, technology begins to hum quietly in the background. Personal computers enter homes. Companies like Apple and IBM introduce machines that feel almost futuristic. The Internet, still in its infancy, connects research institutions. Few can imagine how transformative it will become, but the seeds are planted. Across the ocean, the Cold War intensifies one final time. Rhetoric sharpens, military spending increases, yet behind closed doors, diplomacy begins to thaw relations. By 1989, something extraordinary happens. The Berlin Wall falls, crowds gather, concrete cracks. A divided Europe begins to reunite. 2 years later, in 1991, the Soviet Union dissolves. The Cold War ends. After nearly half a century of tension, the global balance shifts dramatically. For the first time since World War II, the United States stands as the world's sole superpower. Freedom, in the American narrative, appears victorious on the global stage. The 1990s bring a wave of optimism. Economic growth accelerates. The tech industry expands rapidly. The internet becomes public. Email replaces letters. Websites multiply daily. Dot-com startups promise limitless possibility. Information moves at unprecedented speed. Geography begins to matter less. Connection becomes instant. Globalization intensifies. Trade agreements link economies. Supply chains stretch across continents. Products assembled from parts made in multiple nations. The world feels smaller, more integrated, more interdependent. But integration brings complexity. Manufacturing continues to decline domestically. Income inequality widens. Urban centers revive in some areas, while rural regions face stagnation. The benefits of globalization feel uneven. Opportunity expands, but so does competition. Culturally, the nation diversifies rapidly. Immigration reshapes cities. New voices influence music, food, art, and politics. The definition of what it means to be American evolves again. It becomes less tied to ancestry, more tied to shared civic identity. Yet debates over belonging grow louder. In 1995, the Oklahoma City bombing reminds the nation that threats can emerge internally. In 1999, the Columbine shooting shocks the public consciousness. Safety, once assumed in certain spaces, begins to feel uncertain. Freedom includes vulnerability. As the millennium approaches, a strange mixture fills the air. Excitement, anxiety, Y2K, fears of computer failures, celebrations planned worldwide. The clock ticks toward the year 2000. On New Year's Eve, fireworks light the sky. Nothing catastrophic occurs. The lights stay on. The internet remains functional. The world steps into a new century. America enters the 21st century confident, technologically advanced, economically powerful, globally influential. Few anticipate how quickly that confidence will be tested. Freedom has shifted many times, from independence to expansion, from unity to division, from civil rights to market liberty, from Cold War tension to digital acceleration. Now it stands at the edge of something entirely new. The world is more connected than ever before. But connection also spreads fear faster. News travels instantly. Markets react instantly. Voices amplify instantly. And somewhere in the early hours of a September morning in 2001, everything will change again. But for now, rest in this brief moment of late 1990s optimism. The hum of dial-up internet, the glow of bulky computer monitors, the quiet confidence of a nation believing history's hardest battles are behind it. Let your breathing slow. Let the decade fade gently into memory, because the next chapter will test ideas of freedom in ways no one expects. When you are ready, we will step into a new era, one shaped by terror, security, surveillance, and digital revolution. Drift softly now, as the 20th century closes and the 21st begins. The morning of September 11th, 2001 begins like any other. Clear skies, routine commutes, office towers filling with quiet ambition, airplanes tracing familiar paths across blue horizons. No one senses that within hours, the meaning of security will change forever. When the attacks unfold, the shock is immediate. Images loop across every television screen, smoke rising over New York, sirens echoing through Washington. A nation watching in disbelief, nearly 3,000 lives lost in a single morning. The sense of invulnerability collapses. For decades, wars had felt distant, fought overseas, seen through reports and brief clips. Now, the violence is on American soil, and fear settles heavily. In response, unity surges. Flags appear on porches and storefronts. Strangers hold doors open for one another. Political divisions momentarily soften. The phrase, "United we stand," becomes common language. But unity is accompanied by urgency. Security comes the priority. In October 2001, Congress passes the Patriot Act. Surveillance powers expand. Intelligence agencies gain broader authority. Airports transform. Shoes removed. Liquids limited. Security lines lengthen. The balance between liberty and safety becomes a new national debate. The United States launches military operations in Afghanistan. The objective, dismantle al-Qaeda and remove the Taliban from power. 2 years later, in 2003, the US invades Iraq. Claims of weapons of mass destruction dominate headlines. Debate intensifies. Supporters argue it is necessary for security. Critics question the evidence and long-term consequences. Wars stretch longer than expected. Casualties mount. Costs rise into trillions of dollars. Families across the nation feel the weight of deployments. Freedom, once celebrated through economic expansion, is now framed through counterterrorism and sacrifice. Meanwhile, technology continues accelerating quietly in the background. The internet expands rapidly. Social media platforms emerge. Facebook launches in 2004, YouTube in 2005, Twitter in 2006. Voices once limited to small communities now reach millions instantly. Information spreads without gatekeepers, but so do misinformation and division. In 2008, another shock hits the financial crisis. Major banks collapse, stock markets plunge, homes foreclosed, retirement accounts shrink, confidence falters again. The idea that markets always self correct faces intense scrutiny. That same year, Barack Obama is elected president, the first African American to hold the office. For many, it symbolizes profound social progress. For others, political polarization deepens. The digital age amplifies disagreement. Cable news and online forums divide audiences into echo chambers. Freedom of speech thrives. Consensus becomes harder to find. The wars abroad continue. The economy slowly recovers. Technology becomes inseparable from daily life. Smartphones replace flip phones. Notifications replace letters. Streaming replaces cable. Attention spans shorten. Connection never sleeps. The 2010s unfold with constant acceleration. Movements rise online and spill into streets. The Arab Spring demonstrates how digital tools can mobilize populations. At home, debates over immigration, healthcare, policing, and inequality intensify. The conversation grows louder, more fragmented, more immediate. In 2016, another political shift surprises many observers. Donald Trump wins the presidency, campaigning on themes of nationalism, border security, and economic protectionism. Political divisions widen visibly. Public trust in institutions fluctuates. News cycles become relentless. Every moment feels urgent. Freedom now includes the power to publish instantly, to protest instantly, to organize instantly. But it also includes the pressure of constant visibility. Algorithms shape information. Outrage travels faster than reflection. The digital public square feels crowded and chaotic. Then, in 2020, a global pandemic halts the world. COVID-19 spreads rapidly, cities shut down, businesses close, schools move online, hospitals strain under pressure, masks become political symbols, vaccines become sources of hope and debate. Once again, the question emerges, how do you balance personal freedom with collective safety? Economic stimulus packages attempt to stabilize markets. Remote work expands dramatically. Daily routines transform. Isolation increases. Technology becomes lifeline and burden at the same time. Protests erupt in 2020 after the killing of George Floyd. Millions march demanding racial justice. The echoes of the 1960s return in new forms. Conversations about systemic inequality re-enter national focus. The struggle for civil rights proves unfinished. Through it all, one pattern becomes clear. Freedom in the 21st century is no longer only about geography or economics. It is about information, health, security, identity, voice. The United States remains powerful, innovative, influential, but also deeply divided, not along a single line, but across many overlapping ones. And yet, history shows something consistent. The American story has always contained tension between liberty and order, opportunity and inequality, unity and dissent, security and privacy. The early decades of the 21st century do not resolve these tensions, they magnify them. Because technology accelerates everything, because global interconnection increases complexity, because expectations rise. Tonight, as we pause in this modern chapter, imagine the quiet glow of a smartphone screen in a dark room. Notifications buzzing softly, headlines scrolling endlessly. A world both vast and intimate resting in the palm of a hand. Freedom feels powerful, but also fragile, expansive, yet contested. The story is nearing its present moment, but it is not finished, not even close. When you are ready, we will step into the final chapters, where reflection replaces chronology, and we ask the most important question of all: what does freedom mean now? Rest gently. Let the noise fade. Let the screen dim and drift forward into the closing reflections of America's long, unfinished journey. We have walked through revolution, through expansion, through civil war, through reconstruction, through world wars, through protest marches and economic booms, through terror and technology. Now we arrive not at an ending, but at a mirror, because the 2020s are not history written in textbooks. They are history unfolding in real time, and real time feels different, less settled, less certain, more immediate. The United States today is deeply interconnected with the world. Supply chains stretch across oceans. Data flows across invisible networks. A decision in one country can ripple globally within seconds. Freedom is no longer isolated within borders. It is entangled with international systems. At home, demographics continue shifting. Younger generations are more diverse than any before them, more connected, more digitally native. They inherit both unprecedented access to information and unprecedented exposure to misinformation. They question institutions. They challenge traditions. They redefine identity. Political polarization remains intense. Debates are sharp. Campaigns are constant. Social media ensures that no issue stays local for long. Every statement can become national conversation within minutes. The speed of reaction often outruns the speed of reflection. Artificial intelligence rises quietly in the background. Algorithms curate feeds, recommend products, screen job applications, assist in medical diagnoses, compose music, generate images. Technology, once imagined as science fiction, becomes daily routine. Opportunity expands, but so do ethical questions. Who controls the data? Who benefits? Who is left behind? Climate change moves from abstract discussion to lived reality. Wildfires intensify, storms strengthen, heat records break, communities confront environmental vulnerability directly. Freedom now intersects with sustainability, with responsibility toward future generations. Economic inequality remains a defining challenge. Wealth accumulates rapidly in some sectors. Housing costs rise in many cities. Student debt burdens millions. The promise of upward mobility still exists, but feels unevenly distributed. The American dream is debated once again, yet innovation continues. Space companies launch reusable rockets. Medical research advances at unprecedented speed. Entrepreneurs build global platforms from laptops. Artists share work instantly with worldwide audiences. The tools of creation are more accessible than ever before. The question shifts subtly, not whether America is powerful, but how that power is used. Not whether freedom exists, but how it is defined. Is freedom the absence of restriction or the presence of opportunity? Is it individual autonomy or collective well-being? Can it be both? These are not new questions. They echo through every era we've explored, from the founders drafting a constitution, to abolitionists demanding justice, to suffragists marching for votes, to civil rights leaders calling for equality, to citizens debating surveillance after 9/11, to communities balancing public health and personal liberty during a pandemic. Each generation inherits the same tension and reshapes it. Look around today. You will see contradiction and possibility coexisting. A polarized electorate and vibrant civic engagement. Economic disparity and entrepreneurial innovation. Digital overload and creative expression. Anxiety and resilience. Freedom in modern America is no longer a single narrative. It is a mosaic. a patchwork of lived experiences, different in rural towns than in major cities, different for immigrants than for multi-generation families, different across income levels and communities, yet tied together by shared institutions and shared history. Perhaps the most defining feature of this era is speed. Information moves instantly, markets respond instantly, public opinion shifts instantly, and yet deep change still moves slowly. Legislation takes time. Cultural shifts take years. Trust rebuilds gradually. History reminds us that transformation is rarely immediate. Tonight, pause in this present moment. Imagine the quiet hum of electricity in a modern city. Traffic lights changing rhythmically, servers processing data in distant buildings, homes lit softly against the dark, millions of lives unfolding simultaneously, each carrying its own understanding of freedom. The American story has never been linear. It bends, it stumbles, it corrects, it argues with itself, it reinvents itself. And that reinvention may be its most enduring trait. We stand not at a conclusion, but at an open chapter, one still being written by voters, innovators, activists, teachers, soldiers, parents, students, by people arguing online, by people volunteering locally, by people building businesses, by people demanding reform, by people simply trying to live meaningful lives. Freedom remains complex, powerful, fragile, expansive, contested, and perhaps that is the point, because a finished story would mean a finished experiment. And this experiment continues. Let your thoughts slow now. Let the present settle gently around you. The headlines can wait. The debates can pause. The notifications can fade into silence. In the next chapter, we will step back entirely and look at the arc as a whole, not event by event, but theme by theme, pattern by pattern, lesson by lesson. Rest here in the unfinished present, and when you are ready, we will close this journey with reflection on what America has been, what it has struggled to become, and what freedom might mean in the quiet years ahead. Before we close this journey, let us step back, far back, beyond dates, beyond presidents, beyond battles and headlines. Imagine viewing American history from above like watching centuries unfold in a single breath. You would see a pattern, a constant tension between promise and reality, between ideal and implementation, between what is written and what is lived. In 1776, the Declaration of Independence declared that all men are created equal. Yet at that very moment, slavery existed. Women could not vote. Property ownership defined political voice. The ideal was vast, the application was narrow, and so the story began with contradiction. In the 1800s, the nation expanded westward. Opportunity grew for some. Displacement and suffering grew for others. Industry created wealth. It also created harsh labor conditions. The Civil War ended slavery, but did not end inequality. Reconstruction promised integration, but segregation followed. In the 1900s, global wars united the country. But at home, discrimination persisted. The civil rights movement dismantled legal segregation, yet economic disparities remained. The Cold War promoted freedom abroad, while debates over surveillance and loyalty unfolded at home. After 9/11, security expanded, but privacy contracted. Technology empowered voices, but fragmented truth. Globalization created abundance, but widened inequality. Again and again, a rhythm appears: expansion, correction, resistance, reform, adjustment, continuation. America does not move in straight lines. It oscillates, it pushes forward, it pulls back, it argues internally, it redefines itself repeatedly. Perhaps the most enduring idea is not perfection but self-correction. The Constitution itself includes amendments, a built-in mechanism for change. An acknowledgement that no founding document could foresee every future challenge. That flexibility may be one of the nation's quiet strengths. Yet self-correction requires participation, debate, compromise, engagement. It is not automatic, it is human. Across centuries, ordinary people shape outcomes as much as leaders do. Farmers signing petitions, workers forming unions, students organizing sit-ins, voters turning out in record numbers, journalists exposing corruption, entrepreneurs building industries, teachers shaping generations. Power in America has always been layered: local, state, federal, public, private, individual, collective, and freedom has never meant the same thing to everyone. For some, it means minimal government. For others, it means equal access. For some, it is economic mobility. For others, it is civil rights protection. For some, it is security. For others, it is privacy. These definitions overlap and sometimes collide. The American story is not about eliminating that collision, but managing it, negotiating it, enduring it. Consider how many times the nation has faced existential fear, revolution against empire, civil war tearing it apart, world wars threatening democracy, nuclear standoffs during the Cold War, terrorism in the 21st century, economic collapse, pandemic. Each time, predictions of irreversible decline surfaced. Each time, the country adapted in some form, not unchanged, but continuing. Resilience does not mean absence of pain. It means movement despite it. There is another pattern worth noticing: the expansion of who counts. At first, political participation was limited to white male property owners. Over time, the circle widened. Formerly enslaved men gained voting rights. Women gained suffrage. Civil rights laws dismantled legal barriers. The voting age lowered to 18. Discrimination protections expanded. The circle has never widened smoothly. Each expansion required struggle, but the direction across centuries trends toward inclusion. That does not mean equality is complete. It means the framework allows argument in favor of it. So what then defines the American experiment? Perhaps it is this: a nation founded on abstract ideals, continuously forced to reconcile those ideals with lived reality, continuously imperfect, continuously unfinished. Look again at the arc: independence, union, division, reunion, industrialization, global leadership, digital transformation, polarization, recalibration. The thread connecting them all is debate over freedom. Who has it? How much? Under what conditions? At what cost? And maybe the most honest conclusion is this: freedom in America has never been static. It expands through pressure, contracts through fear, reforms through activism, stabilizes through compromise, then faces new challenges again. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the echo of generations speaking across time. Founders arguing in Philadelphia, soldiers writing letters home from battlefields, marchers singing in Selma, factory workers clocking out at dusk, immigrants stepping onto unfamiliar shores, programmers typing late into the night, parents explaining civics to their children, all participating in a story larger than themselves. Now we are near the end of this journey, not because history ends, but because reflection must give way to rest. In the final chapter, we will not recount events. We will not name years. We will not revisit conflicts. Instead, we will ask one simple question: what does it mean to inherit an unfinished experiment? For now, let the centuries blur softly together. Let the arguments quiet. Let the headlines fade. And hold in your mind a single image: a nation constantly becoming, never fully arrived. When you are ready, we will close with the quietest chapter of all. And now we arrive at the end. Not the end of history, not the end of debate, not the end of the American story, but the end of this journey together. We began with a revolution. a small collection of colonies challenging an empire, an audacious idea written onto parchment that people could govern themselves. That liberty was not granted by a king, but inherent in human existence. From that fragile beginning, a vast and complicated nation emerged. It expanded across a continent. It fractured in civil war. It rebuilt. It industrialized. It fought global conflicts. It marched for civil rights. It raced into space. It connected the world through technology. It argued endlessly with itself. At every stage, the same question resurfaced. What does freedom truly mean? Freedom from oppression, freedom to vote, freedom to worship, freedom to speak, freedom to build, freedom to dissent, freedom to define one's own future. And yet, freedom has always required balance, liberty and responsibility, security and privacy, individual rights and collective well-being, opportunity and fairness. The American experiment has never been about achieving perfection. It has been about maintaining motion, about refusing to remain frozen in one era, about allowing criticism, about surviving disagreement, about adjusting the course without abandoning the journey. Through centuries, one truth becomes clear. The nation's greatest strength may not be wealth, or military power, or technological innovation. It may be adaptability, the ability to bend without breaking, to argue without dissolving, to reform without rewriting its entire foundation. But adaptability depends on participation, on citizens who care, who vote, who question, who build, who teach, who create, who serve. The Constitution is ink and paper without people willing to engage with it. Institutions are buildings without individuals willing to uphold them. Every generation inherits both the achievements and the unfinished work of the last. Slavery ended, but equality required further struggle. Segregation ended, but justice required continued vigilance. Economic growth expanded, but fairness demanded new conversations. Security increased, but liberty demanded careful protection. The story has never paused long enough to declare itself complete, and perhaps it never will. Imagine standing quietly at dusk, an American city skyline in the distance, lights flickering on one by one, each window holding a different story, different beliefs, different dreams, different fears, yet all connected by shared space and shared history. That is the modern inheritance. Not uniformity, but coexistence. Not agreement, but participation. Not final answers, but ongoing questions. If there is a lesson woven through centuries, it may be this. Freedom is not self-sustaining. It requires renewal, reflection, engagement, sometimes courage, sometimes patience, often compromise. The American experiment continues not because it is flawless, but because it remains open, open to amendment, open to protest, open to reinvention, open to debate. And so the final chapter is not a conclusion. It is an invitation to view history not as distant events, but as a living thread that now runs through you, through your choices, your voice, your understanding, your actions. One day this era will be studied as just another chapter. Future generations would analyze our debates, our technologies, our crises, our reforms. They will ask whether we protected the principles we inherited and whether we expanded them wisely. History is patient. It watches quietly. It records without emotion. And it reminds us that permanence is rare, but influence is lasting. Tonight, as this story closes, let the centuries settle softly around you. From revolution to reconstruction, from industrial smoke to digital screens, from marching feet to silent scrolling thumbs, a long arc of striving. The American story remains unfinished, and perhaps that is its most honest form. Not a finished monument, but a living conversation. Rest now. Let the journey end gently, and carry with you a simple awareness. History is not only something we read, it is something we continue. And before you drift off tonight, if you enjoyed this slow journey through history, if these quiet stories helped you relax, reflect, and unwind, then consider subscribing to Astarish. Here, we explore history softly. We slow it down. We turn loud events into calm storytelling so you can learn why you rest. New long form, peaceful history journeys are waiting for you. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and subscribe to Tira Sleep 4, where history speaks gently.